In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
Half a day, everyone. It's Nestor Licanto again, once again, with another edition of In Full Zoom. And this week, our topic is a serious one. It's eliminating violence and harassment in the world of work. And joining us for this segment are Ms. Wendy Chun-Hoon, who is the director of the U.S. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau, and of course, our former colleague in the media business, and now the director of the Guam Bureau of Women's Affairs, Jayne Flores. Thanks for joining us, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, let me just set the stage first with you, Wendy. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do with the U.S. Department of Labor, and about this global 16-day campaign to stop gender-based violence, which just ended a short while ago.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nestor. It's really great to be in this conversation together. So I direct the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor in the United States. And, in that we are a 100-year-old agency, and we're still the only agency that's congressionally mandated to really focus on issues that impact working women and to represent those interests in the public policy process. So we're unique, but we've been around 100 years. And, I like to talk about some of our superpowers really being strong data analysis, a lot of strength out in the regions across the country that help with stakeholder engagement. So really keeping an ear to what working women need. And certainly, and this is what brings us together today, we have grant-making authority. And so we have initiated this brand new and really the inaugural round of the Fostering Access, Rights and Equity Grants Program.
Right. And of course, the person who's handling that for Guam is Ms. Jayne Flores. Jayne, tell us a little bit about that particular program.
Well, when we got the grant application, I checked with Jeff Sablon over at the Guam Department of Labor. He handles the complaints about workplace harassment or any kind of fair labor complaints. And he said that while we don't have a lot of workplace harassment complaints with regard to volume, maybe there are like 30 or 40 a year, which is, a decent amount for Guam. We do, as you know, because you report on them every day, have very high domestic violence and sexual assault rates here. And so when we wrote the grant, we said, well, we have workplace harassment, and also 78% of our workplace establishments are small businesses that don't have maybe an HR department. And do they even know what workplace harassment is? And so how can we get the word out? Because we figure the U.S. Department of Labor, Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the reasons for this FAIR grant was because women have been more affected by the pandemic as in locally, nationally, and internationally. Women are more affected. The work entities that employ more women have been more affected. And so a lot of women are staying in their jobs because they need their jobs, and they're keeping quiet about things that happen to them at the workplace. So that was one of our focuses, was to try to get people to know what is harassment, and then hopefully it can translate into what's happening at home or what's happening outside the workplace too.
Yeah, Wendy, can you give us an idea of the extent of gender-based workplace violence in the mainland U.S.?
Yeah, what I would say to double down, Jayne, on what you just shared, and then come back to that question, Nestor, is really how impacted and disproportionately impacted women have been during the pandemic because of several things, right? Concentrated in jobs that are some of the lowest paying, least protected jobs in the economy. And two, really many of those jobs being frontline workforce. So sort of a double impact of what you're talking about, Jayne, where you might not raise your hand because you really need that paycheck, even though you know your rights are being violated or you're being harassed in the workplace, but also the health risk, and so many women being sort of in that frontline workforce. And then, frankly, a big factor around not having what we we are talking about a care infrastructure headed into the pandemic. So women getting pushed out because of caregiving responsibilities at home. So just the nexus of how closely tied women's economic security and employment security is in this moment, and how complex it has become in COVID. So, one thing I know, this is now a well-termed phrase about the shadow pandemic, but just in the United States alone, and this is obviously echoed across the world, as folks went into COVID protocols and, isolation happened, and folks were spending a lot more time at home in those, sort of intimate working environments, and different working environments, domestic violence incidents rose by 8%. So it has been a longstanding issue. Obviously, it's why both Jayne and we care about this issue of domestic violence and its impact in the world of work, but also those numbers significantly rose during COVID.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
Yeah. And we were talking a little bit earlier off camera about, distinguishing sexual violence and harassment, but really its impact is pretty similar. But can you let me ask you first, Jayne, and then I'll ask Wendy to expound. Just explain the not so much the difference, but what is workplace harassment?
Well, from what Jeff explained to me, and we're working with some entities, HR entities like SHRM and some of our other HR resource entities, to try to develop this program for this grant. And, workplace harassment can, and I'm not an expert, so please, but, either touching or just verbal harassment. It can be verbal harassment. It can be harassment where you make something difficult for them to do their job. You're doing something that makes them feel uncomfortable and pressured, and that they are in fear of either losing their job or in fear that they're not going to be able to do their job because of what you're doing. You're making them more difficult, or it's just language that you may use. And sometimes, and I spoke with SHRM about this, and they said that a lot of times, especially here in where we have so many Asian cultures, the males may not realize that what they're doing constitutes harassment. And so part of the grant is to have these presentations at businesses too, because the businesses need to know in order to be able to stop it. And like I said, 78% of our businesses are small businesses. They don't have an HR department. So if you are getting harassed, if somebody is, leaving you notes or verbally, maybe not sexually harassing you, but verbally calling you names or belittling you or something like that, and you don't know where do you turn to? Where do you go? What do you do? And part of the grant is to educate women on how to handle this, what to do. And we're focusing on women. The retail and hospitality industries are two of the industries that have been most affected by the pandemic. They employ a higher number of females. And of course, here, hospitality is everything to us. Our hospitality industry is our bread and butter aside from the military. So we have a lot of women who may be handling their job because they don't know how to, and putting up with things because they don't know what else to do. And hopefully this grant will help alleviate that and help stop it.
Yeah, Wendy, you want to expound on that a little bit?
Just to say, I think it really is multifaceted, as Jayne is saying. Early in the pandemic, as restaurants were closing and servers, and particularly women, were fearful of losing their jobs, or as businesses and establishments reopened, and that sort of internal fear of not wanting to jeopardize your employment situation by saying something. Women on the job were experiencing, for example, a lot of restaurant workers were experiencing harassment from customers who would say, or managers who would say, take your mask down. Like they really need to see your face, right? When that is a clear health risk to the worker themselves. And that feeling of unsafe. There's, as we work to get more women into what we still call non-traditional employment or non-traditional occupations, which are some of the higher paying jobs in the economy. So in the skilled trades, in the built economy, built infrastructure, where women are really the minority in the workplace, 3%, 2% sometimes, like well beneath the 25% that constitutes what makes for a non-traditional occupation. There's a lot of bullying and harassment that is on the job that's between colleagues, that goes unchecked, right? And then, of course, the intersection of domestic violence, as we were talking about earlier, and the world of work, where we have to really think through what is the role of employers in making a safe environment? What is the role of public policy or employer policy in making sure that women who are experiencing, or anyone who's experiencing that domestic violence where it intersects with the workplace as well, things like paid leave, paid safe time is something we talk about a lot. Making sure that people have access to flexible schedules, solutions like that. Thinking about roles of unions, in fact, to help workers negotiate and bargain for, protections against retaliation when you do raise your hand and say, I'm experiencing this, it could intersect with, the way I show up to work. And you come forward in that way to make it known, to really seek some support, and then you face retaliation or discrimination as a result. So really multifaceted and a lot of roles that many players can be affecting.
How does US DOL address those things? Are there rules and regulations if someone comes forward and makes a complaint against her employer? How do you what's the procedure there?
Yeah, I feel a little bad that I can't fully answer that. I remember, Jayne, I heard you say earlier you were talking to your colleague. I should inquire more deeply with our colleagues at some of the enforcement agencies. But I think all to say we're not collectively doing enough. There is more that we could all be doing, both to enforce laws that are on the books, like when somebody raises their hand and makes an individual complaint, not the Department of Labor necessarily, but the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity, can clearly address those individual cases where somebody is calling, raising their hand and saying, this has happened to me, what can be done about it? But I think collectively, there's a lot more that we can be doing across the agency, across all of our government, to make sure that people both know their rights and that we take a more proactive stance around education, visibility for these issues, and then figuring out systemic responses that go beyond enforcement.
Right. And Jayne, what are some of the outreach efforts that are being planned, both media and individual, say, organizations or businesses themselves?
What the grant is going to do is first pay HR professionals to develop a program or a presentation that will actually talk about workplace harassment, what it is, what constitutes workplace harassment, what you can do if you're facing it, who do you go to, what are your avenues of restitution or to get it to stop, and also to go out into some of the smaller communities like the Micronesian communities, maybe church groups or villages and the mayor's offices or some of the smaller women's groups on islands, and let people know about what this is, and also to translate it into other languages, Chuukese, Chamorro, Korean, Chinese, where we know that some of these women might be putting up with things just because they need their jobs. And we're also going to have some PSAs that are going to talk about not only the meetings, but what is workplace harassment and how do you stop it? And so the grant is very multifaceted, but I did want to pick up on something that Wendy had said about domestic violence and reaching into the workplace, and also to inform employers that sometimes if someone, because we do have so much domestic violence here and so many incidents, if you have an employee who looks like they are, withdrawn or wearing, sunglasses or long sleeves or dark clothing, the first thing that pops into your mind as an employer is not that person is experiencing domestic violence. It might be drugs. And to recognize as an employer the signs of domestic violence and how you could help an employee that is maybe experiencing it to feel safer at work, because it does translate into the workplace. It affects people in their workplace. And so this is something else that crosses with it. It's very multifaceted. And, to get employers to realize that too.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
I'm wondering if there are programs in the reverse. In other words, if there is an offender that is your employee, are there programs for that?
I know the Superior Court of Guam does have perpetrator programs, but there are not employer programs. I would think that would be a little bit difficult because, who here is committing domestic violence? You're not going to get employees that are going to be readily, admitting that, yeah, I beat my somebody at home. And so that is a little bit difficult. I think most of those programs are court ordered, if your case is adjudicated.
Yeah, I imagine that would be, no one's going to raise their hand and say, but
right.
If there were programs in which it would be able to assist them
right.
if they're, like, as you say, right. The court had ordered.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
And I think that for what you were saying, just the education about it, if you do have an employee who is a perpetrator or a potential perpetrator, having this kind of workplace education and awareness may make them go, oh, wow, I shouldn't be doing that. That's not a good thing. And it's a crime too, but so.
Yeah. Wendy, what are some other issues that the U.S. DOL is looking into with respect to this whole issue? I know that 2021, according to this release, marks the 30th anniversary of the Global 16 Days campaign, which I mentioned earlier. Are there anything else takeaways from that campaign?
Yeah. Yes. What I would say to that, and I'm sorry I forgot to address that earlier, is really taking a comprehensive look at what constitutes the workplace. So Jayne, you flagged earlier in our conversation that most of the employers that you're working with in Guam are smaller employers, less than 20. But think about the variety of workplace, what's considered the workplace around the globe, and in the United States, really thinking through informal work environments, thinking through other informal economy jobs, right? Where you may not know who is your employer, what rights do I have, do those rights convey if I'm in the informal economy, thinking about agricultural workers. So I think really paying attention to sort of a holistic look on what constitutes the workplace, making sure that within that context, folks are really aware of their rights and have the ability to exercise them. And that's clearly what we're trying to work on with the FAIR grant. And then something you said earlier, Jayne, that I think has huge potential that really is the innovation here, which is the partnership between government and community-based organizations who are often those trusted messengers, or employers who are often the place where the hubs in the community that really just have the trust of the community that can help play a really critical role in that kind of culture change that we're talking about, Jayne, right? It's not just enforcement. It's not just about knowing your rights and then having them enforced and having access to them, but it's a tougher, maybe more stubborn change that we need to make about culture change, right? So
Yeah.
but just the really powerful role that community-based organizations can play with government in that.
Absolutely.
That's a great point, Wendy, culture change. And I think you touched on that earlier, Jayne, culture change, particularly in the Pacific Island areas. Talk about that.
Well, we have, in trying to get a handle on our sexual harassment and domestic violence problem here, where the culture is very male oriented, and where there is, unfortunately, we have, silence because the perpetrator is either the breadwinner or has control. And just the education and awareness of what harassment is and how that will. And one of the things we wrote in the grant was that how informing women of their rights with regard to this can make them also go home and discuss with each other about, wait a minute, what's happening here. And just the awareness and the education, spreading the word out, is something that's going to help stop it. And, we all know that when you educate the women in a community, the entire community benefits. So this is something that is going to help our entire community with the issues that challenge us.
Yeah. Wendy, what would you say are the biggest challenges going forward? I know you mentioned the pandemic has kind of exacerbated what was already some major issues. But assuming we're going to get out of this pandemic sooner rather than later, what are you looking ahead to as the biggest challenges for this work, putting an end to workplace violence against women?
Yeah. I think it is really that holistic approach to everybody has a role, and we must step to the plate to fulfill it. So whether you're the employer and you're thinking about risk planning in the workplace and thinking about who might be most impacted of my workforce, right? And designing strategy around that, whether you're, a public policy maker and you can address some of the real gaps in public policy, like access to sick and safe time. We always say safe time, right? Because you're going to need that kind of time away from work to deal with, seeking support, seeking police reporting to the police, or seeking support for your family going forward, especially if you are the breadwinner. The role that unions can play, the role that the community can play. So I think that is a huge opportunity. Everybody's got to do their part. And really coming back to more scaled strategies for how to address bullying and harassment in the workplace. That is a really tough culture change piece. Part of it hopefully will change as more women get into some of these non-traditional, quote unquote, but higher paying jobs in the economy. And then how are we supporting them to stay in those jobs by really combating harassment and bullying on the job? I think those are two key interventions that we're going to need coming out of the pandemic and have long needed.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
Yeah, just as a side note, I was just thinking of this. Is there a difference between, or statistically, are there any differences between a women-run business or enterprise than a male-run business or enterprise in terms of the violence against women in the workplace?
I don't know that I know definitively. I wonder what you're seeing, Jayne, in some of the businesses that you all are engaging.
Well, we only have about 17 to 22% of our businesses on Guam are women-owned businesses. And I know this because we just got a women's set-aside law passed earlier this year. But I would hope that with women-owned businesses, there would be less workplace harassment, because women, elevating each other is always a good thing. So you would hope that. We don't have any statistics on that, but we do have. We don't have a whole lot of women-owned businesses. We are hoping to increase those numbers. So
yeah, Yeah, that just popped into my head.
Yeah.
Sorry
Good
about that.
question, though. It's a good question. You would
I
hope.
put my money there. I put my money
Yeah.
there, Jayne.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so. We only got a couple of minutes left. Just want to give you guys a chance to say some parting words, and I'll begin with you, Jayne, and we'll wind up with Wendy.
Well, I would like to thank Wendy and the Women's Bureau of USDOL for this grant. It's $254,348. We're going to use every penny of it to help educate women and educate employers about workplace harassment, about what their avenues of recourse are, what it is. And what I'm really excited about is that this grant and its education is also going to dovetail with a Guam Bureau of Women's Affairs education and awareness campaign that we also are going to have running about sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking, so that there really will be a lot more awareness of all of these issues out there in the community, and in the ways, what is the language that we can use that resonates with islanders as to how to stop this and how to have, respect for everybody and respect for what everybody does, regardless of your gender, in the workplace and at home. So that is something that, I just want to thank USDOL and Wendy and the Women's Bureau, because they're really helping us out with this.
The thanks
Look
is
forward to it.
ours. Yeah, the thanks is ours, Jayne. We're thrilled to be in partnership with you and to learn from you throughout this, hopefully beyond the grant period. And what I would say about the opportunity with the FAIR grants of fostering access, rights, and equity is, we have a moment where, legislation only goes so far. Some of the COVID response legislation across the country, right, across both of our governments, Jayne, has made available key income supports and, just in time to reach families and women in their workplace, but also in their family life. And it's nothing if families aren't accessing these. So a critical part of the FAIR grant is to make sure that people are able to avail themselves of all the workplace rights they do have, all the income supports that they can access in this moment to really get through. But along the way, and this is something you said, Jayne, it's about building agency and activism within the community to really say, here's what we have, here's what we don't have. Together we can make change. And I think that's really the opportunity to partner between community-based organizations closest to the issues that their communities face, and the role of government to really make sure that we're doing that at scale, the best work at scale. So I'm looking forward to this. This is an incredible partnership. Thank you.
All right. Wendy Chun-Hoon is the director of the Department of Labor's Women's Bureau. And of course, Jayne Flores is the director of the Guam Bureau of Women's Affairs. Thank you, ladies, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and stay safe, everybody. Thanks so much, Nestor, for the opportunity.
Happy holidays. I'm Nestor Licanto. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week on In Full Zoom.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.